Shae Matthews. You are the inner game Shae man. Welcome to the Will to Win podcast. It's great to have you on the show today. We're going to be talking about masculine energy, how to be a better man, how to demonstrate confidence and the ability to talk with women confidently and just be able to express yourself in a really unique, distinct way that will help you stand out.
Love it. Thanks for having me, Steve. It's going to be great. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, and where did this all start? Like, what got you involved in this whole masculinity, the strong man, and being, courageous and all that kind of stuff?
Great question. Well, funnily enough, most of my journey started out of humble beginnings. I was brought up in a way where I had a little bit of a tough environment around me with, other kind of competitive masculine forces, like growing up in a town full of, other guys that were into like sports. I wasn't particularly into those sports, or kids who had their own kind of hierarchies and stuff. So obviously feeling like I was a little bit of an underdog, and then had to learn how to, fend for myself to a degree and then think for myself. So a lot of it actually started with that pressure, which I think a lot of guys often feel in life, which is feeling like they're trying to be okay in a world of, competition and hierarchy and other negative kind of masculine forces to a degree. And it was also coming from a positive source as well. I was lucky enough to have some good masculine mentors and some good concepts. And ultimately, I think I was brought up like a lot of guys were back in the 90s and those periods of time, which was with a sense of heroic masculine journey, with this kind of hero's potential journey, which I think is something that our society could always be reminded of. And I think it's a healthy part of, our mindsets that we need, particularly as young men, but always as men, really. We need to have some type of like a sense of a vision and a purpose and a journey and a story that helps us to make sense of the world. So yeah, that's where it all started. And then through a range of different steps, I ended up getting involved with basically mindset and transformation work. I worked in bodywork fields with Chinese medicine, and then I got into spiritual fields with things like Buddhism and Taoism. And I used to practice a number of different Kung Fu styles and have a bit of a sense of what the world was through the eyes of those particular philosophies. And then eventually I ended up founding a company with a friend of mine that was based around masculine lifestyle and communication and relationships and sexuality with men and women. And we spent a lot of time traveling the world, helping a lot of guys. So basically, I've got a big background in helping men from the foundation of coaching, communication, holistic thinking, embodiment. And, we could cut that in a lot of different ways, but that's the pretty quick resume.
Yeah, and when it comes to being a man in modern day society and demonstrating, your masculinity, like what's changed? Is it the same as what it was, 20, 30, 40 years ago? What does it mean to be a man in today's modern day world?
Well, that's a great question. I think that we are up against changing dynamics of let's say the rules of masculinity. And I think that's happened many times in history. There's different like layers of changes that happen inside of technology, inside of society. And it's, a little bit of a rocky period of time when men have to go through these types of transitions. I think both sexes, men and women, have senses of identity that they're looking for inside of the society. So it's a good question, like, how is it changing and what is the role of man in 2025 or moving forward? And I think that in some sense, the basic principles of masculinity are the same, because the basic principles of humanity always pretty much maintain the same functions, but the way in which they get expressed through the medium of our society and the way in which people accept them and the rules of the behaviors can change quite a lot. So, it is a good question about what is it to be a man in 2025. I think that that's a very broad thing. I think it's up to the individual to find his own answers to that question, to be honest. But I do think that there are good principles like grounding, developing strong sense of purpose, confidence, meaning, the ability to project your intent and have their skill of being able to be a space holder or someone that can create a sense of leadership and capability and confidence, somebody who can develop skills. These are, typical kind of masculine traits, if that makes sense.
Oh, certainly. And a question that I've been wanting to ask you is about the difference between a man who comes across as dominant and a man who comes across as weak. And I think in society, like, women are more attracted to dominant men than what they are a man who's passive, who comes across as weak. What's your take on that?
Well, it's a great question. Like, I think that ultimately we all have different energies inside of us, and if you look at men, we have like a lot of expression of different potentials, and three good pillars, let's say, that a man can develop inside of himself is a sense of playfulness, which is almost like his kind of boyish playfulness and his innocent sort of joy. His softness, which is also about his ability to have empathy and connect, and in many ways have more of those type of caring and feeling and like sensitive type of traits, and his ferocity. So his sense of assertiveness, his sense of leadership, his sense of control, his sense of inserting his will to be able to move forward with effectiveness. So those three pillars are a very important balance for a man to understand inside of himself. Now, if a man is stuck in any one of those pillars too much, then he's going to be imbalanced with his ability to relate to the rest of the world or relate to women in a way that is going to be a whole spectrum. Now, generally, I think that from an evolutionary perspective, the attraction to masculine dominance, masculine leadership, masculine confidence has more value in the female psyche and in the sexual marketplace than being nice, empathetic, considerate, and in many ways like being somebody that's more of a sensitive or a seemingly like weaker position. Now, generally, this is a sad truth, but we do live in a society where the power of having assertiveness and confidence and control does tend to get more results, especially resources and hierarchy climbing and, more capabilities of being able to like confidently manipulate the world. If, we come from more of those like assertive, masculine, dominant types of traits, as opposed to the more, let's say, agreeable and soft and empathetic traits, even though those agreeable traits are actually much more stable traits for long-term relationships. They're much more stable traits for more healthier cultural types of experiences. So on the surface, generally the idea of like people being assertive, people being dominant, people being confident gets put on a pedestal as being more attractive. And once again, women tend to feel receptive to that because both of cultural programming and also their biological programming that is leading them to feel that that's like a more higher value, high ranking type of quality. Now, of course, keep in mind that that's a generalization, and there are women who don't believe that. There are women who are actually not looking for that, and there are women who are maybe turned on by a man, who's more agreeable and more aware and more sensitive. And I think the truth is that like there's always going to be a balance between those two, and the ultimate package is to be both able to be assertive and confident and to be sensitive and agreeable in different proportions at different times. And obviously there's an intuitive sense of when's the right time and what's the right time. But that's something that, a man develops through skill and through testing and through feedback, and hopefully also through having like the right types of support and the right types of feedback from society, from men, from women, to be able to help him to make sense of it. So it is definitely a common, let's say, story that we see in our culture where dominant men are seen as valuable. But the flip side of it, as we also see, is that there's a lot of dominant men that are responsible for a lot of behaviors that are not necessarily good for themselves or for others. And that's where we see the opposite, where we kind of villainize dominant men as well. So I think, it's a tricky business about like, if it's not this or that sometimes. And ultimately, this is where it comes down to like people need to have their own individual perspective on themselves and on how they relate to others. And I would like to think that the world is not black and white and we're not just this or that, of course. So it's more of an ability to have, like, we could call it modulation, the ability to switch different types of vibes, feelings, expressions at different moments. Much the same as, improvisation, or much the same as dance. We want to be able to have different tempos, different flows, different moves, sometimes advancing, sometimes receding, sometimes holding, different positions inside of an interaction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is a balancing act. And I think it's good when a man is dominant and he takes charge, he takes responsibility, but sometimes he does need to take a step back and be a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more open to conversation, and sort of, open up and not be ashamed of what, of sharing his feelings. And that's, I think, a challenge that a lot of men face, especially in a relationship, is that they can't look weak. So they shouldn't, talk about their day and, what went wrong and how they're, upset or they're angry or they're not happy with, what happened during that day. So, yeah, it really is something that we men struggle with. And like, how would you, what would you say to a man who is ashamed of that?
Well, I think that the way in which we relate to other people and how we feel about ourselves, and also the types of interpretations that we make about our experience, are very much going to be based on our subconscious programming systems. Now, some men come from that type of programming that you're talking about, where they've been taught that expressing their feelings or being empathetic or being more of somebody that's like looking for validation or security by talking about their problems is something to be devalued. It's something to be shamed. It's something to be not seen as useful. Now, there is a dark and a light side to every one of these positions. So the positive side of that type of attitude is that those type of men tend to be perceived as having more control. They get perceived as having more capability. They get perceived as being stronger. At least that's the idea. And in a way, they do receive some benefits as a result of that. The other positive is that they don't have to face the complexities and the sophistication of emotional relating. They don't have to deal with developing the capabilities of emotional intelligence that might be related to those types of domains in themselves or in others. Now, the dark side of that is that they might get rigid, they might get stuck, they might feel isolated, they might feel emotionally deprived, they might feel quite numb, and in many ways they might feel quite empty in their fulfillment of life. And oftentimes the people that are trying to relate to them, like their partners, their friends, their children, will have a very limited range of being able to connect with them also, because there's only so much that is available in the permission of the emotional relating that's going on in a guy that's like that. Now, there are men who are on the other side of the spectrum, men that are more empathetic, men that like to share their feelings more, men that like to talk and be expressed and be seen, and men that are like more in like a, let's say, an expressive mode. of wanting to process their emotions. And, in the upside and the positive side, then they have a broader range of experience. They have a more openness. They probably have a more deeper, more sensual, more intimate type of like connection with the world around them. And on the dark side, they probably get themselves into trouble where people might judge them. They might feel vulnerable. They might feel like they're being weak or perceived as being more open to attack if they come from those types of positions as well. So both of these sides of this spectrum of masculine expression and reservation are very dependent on the type of beliefs and the type of tendencies that the individual man that we're talking about is dealing with.